A collage of war, environmental collapse by human cause, the war on terror, constantly documenting human error, recording the social fabric unwinding, blinding us to our innate state of being fine. I believe every human being is divine. The gods we search and serve reside in us and in this earth. There is no curse of Adam and Eve. We just lost our capacity to believe in human dignity and goodness. I am proud to be human. Now is our time to be choosing. Clarity over confusion. What we feel over illusion. Moving to the next level of being together. The only way we're gonna make it is by being collectively clever across the intergenerational, tribal, racial. What are they? Let me have a look. National, tribal, racial, spiritual, financial fragmentation, weaving together the pieces, releases the emerging new. From chaos comes order, breaking down the borders. We're the same people that built Stonehenge. Yeah.
Can I
All
get
right.
a copy of that?
Sure. Ancient places bring out the ancient parts of us. The ancient starts in us. Our ancient goals, our ancient souls. Do we have the self-love to let go and evolve? Do we have the self-love to forgive ourselves? Do we have the self-love to unleash our souls? Do we have the self-love to surrender attachments for higher goals? And it goes on for a long time.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Are you putting these wraps on the mat?
Sure. So there's something about like when we're faced with a complex, overwhelming, seemingly impossible challenge, right? It's like what human beings have done, probably, I imagine, since we existed, is turn to each other. Right? That's what we do when we don't know what to do. We talk to people. Meg wrote a whole book about it, right? Turning to each other. Right? So it's like, why core teams? Why do we form core teams? Because the only way we're going to make it is if we're collectively clever. Like the challenges that we're faced with, the level of uncertainty, the amount of information saturation demands that we figure out how to work together in response to the challenges that we're faced with. It just demands it. We've got to get over our bullshit and figure out how to be in rooms with people we fundamentally disagree with, or we are not going to be able to deal with the challenges we want to. There's no hiding from this colliding with the end of an era. It's never been clearer. Some will get left behind their remains to find in millions of years as we discover again our evolution from Homo confusion to Homo lumen. But there's no doubt for me, this is not, on some level, this is like, yeah, we got to learn together and like build good relationships and like get to breadth and like, these are, for me, when I think about my children and I think 7 generations ahead, like these are training grounds in survival skills. These core team places where we get together and respond to challenges by actually working across our difference with each other. Yeah? So, groups of people are smarter than individuals. That's the basic assumption behind forming a core team, right? Groups of people are smarter than individuals. Yeah, there's that. I don't even know. I quote it a lot, and I don't know where it comes from, and I'm really sorry if the ancestors of this are watching me, because I don't know where it comes from. But it's like faster alone, but further together. Sure, like I'm working in Yarmouth, when we started the Drop-In Youth Centre in Yarmouth, and like the guy who runs the YMCA, Old Boys Club of this rural community, he comes in and he said, I've been leading for 25 years in this community. Joined our core team meeting. I've been leading for 25 years in this community, and I keep looking over my shoulder and nobody's with me. And he said, what you're doing here in terms of bringing the community into the core team and then going out and engaging the community as you design the youth centre, he said, I think it's the only way we're going to get a place that can meet the needs of our young people. Yeah? One basic assumption. Why core teams? Another one that's really clear for me, why core teams, is that people trust invitation from people like them. Simple as that. Core teams have to reflect the communities we're seeking to engage. Right? People trust invitations from people like them. Yeah? So when we're forming our core teams, we're actually bringing together microcosms of the very challenges we're seeking to encounter or work with out in the world. Right? One, it creates authentic and real invitation into the communities or people or groups or departments or whatever it is we're seeking to work with. Yeah? But two, it actually means that core teams become the training grounds for dealing with the issues when we go and do broader scale engagement. When we reach out for breadth, the core team prepares us for it. Yeah? I got called out on this. We did this large engagement around a huge $550 million building that's going in right down in the heart of downtown city of Halifax. And we ran a great engagement, and it fundamentally changed the design of the building, and that was awesome. And it was very, very conflictual, but the results were great in terms of it changed as a result of public input, no question, right? You can hate the building, you can't say it didn't change as a result of public input. And right. But afterwards, a couple of my buddies, because I've been working in the youth field for a long time, they kind of pulled me aside and they said, Tim, all the people who were turning up to those engagements were the kind of white, middle, and upper class of Halifax, And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And they go, do you know why? Because that's your team. That's your team. And I was like, oh, you're right. That's my team. Yeah, all entrepreneurial, all progressive, all open-minded humans, but your team has to reflect who you're seeking to engage. The other thing about core teams, why core teams, is that the core teams allow us to move between different forms of organizing. They allow us to move between different forms of organizing. Core teams meet in circle. I mean, how many people are part of a core team of some shape or form here, if they use that language? Right, loads of people. Cool, look at that. Oh no. I'm teaching people who are doing it.
I can work with you.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank you, Caitlin. That was like the immediate turnaround. Oh no, thank goodness. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, buddy. So we can meet in circle to reflect. Yeah, people step up and take responsibility, and we move into taking action. Right? Hierarchy. Someone says, I'm willing to do something. I'm willing to go learn. Right? Great. Off you go. Yeah? It's about connecting together different people, different relationships, different communities, different ideas come together. We work with network. Yeah? And at every scale of this stuff, and I'll come to that in a minute. All right? And also, for core teams to function effectively, you need some kind of bureaucracy. You need some kind of basic organizing pattern. Who's being paid to organize us meeting together? Who's handling the budget? Right? You need the four fundamental forms of organizing that exist in the world to function effectively as a core team. You need to be able to practice circle. You need to be able to move swiftly into hierarchy to get shit done. Right? You need to be able to build connections across very diverse and often conflictual participants and groups of people. Yeah? And you need to have the capacity to build structures and infrastructure in place that create just enough stability for innovation to take place. Right? And the beauty of it is you don't have to choose. You don't have to pick one and be like, we're going to be a bureaucracy. No, we're going to like practice circle, and then circle becomes this like tyranny that everybody's forced into, and it's like hell. Right? It's like what best serves need, and how do we apply the form that best serves need right now? Right? So the purpose of core teams is not to get attached to any of the modalities. It's to be able to move between them in response to the needs that exist. Make sense? All right, cool. There's some things I definitely want to say, and I'm trying to limit how much I say, so I'm going to... yeah. All right.
10, 4, circle, hierarchy, move into action, and this is the third.
Circle, hierarchy, bureaucracy, network. They're the 4 basic organizational patterns that exist in the world for us to choose from at the moment. And what I'm suggesting is that core teams are an exploration of a 5th, if you like, where you don't have to choose between any of those. You can move between them with some fluidity. And there's actually a step beyond that. But
Say them one more time.
Post-it, put it in the resource book online.
Yeah.
If you're panicking about trying to get like all the wording down, just know that it'll be
Yeah, and I also just want to say we have just really limited time for
Thank
this
you.
speech, so we need to keep
good.
ourselves.
So and what we're going to do straight after this teach is you're going to get together and like be in groups and be able to digest it. So like, let me just like pour this out, and then you guys can kind of like pull it apart a little bit or do whatever you want to it, and then we'll all come back together and have some chance to kind of like move it kind of a step further. All right, cool. So how the core teams function. Action is built around people taking responsibility. It's not something that's necessarily delegated, right? So people step up, they take responsibility and say, I want to do this, right? That could be in response to need. That could also be in response to like personal passion. Both of those things take place, right? Yeah. There's a really solid balance between going out and doing things, yeah, and actually having a capacity to reflect on them. One of the great dangers of core teams is that people get so excited about being together and learning from each other. Like the trajectory of learning within a core team can be incredibly fast for the people who are part of it. Yeah. But what happens is they move so fast, they lose connection with the very people they're seeking to engage and transform, whether that be within their community, within their organization, across their county. Yeah? So like a pattern of core team has to be this movement of like being in our own learning and growth and engaging. Being in our own learning and growth and engaging. Yeah? You have to be in that. It's almost like, in the art of hosting, they always talk about these breaths. I don't know how many there are now. But it's like the breaths of design. Right? You've got to move through those breaths. You know, my experience of core teams is that they need some kind of like physical or online hub where information is shared and gathered. If you don't have some kind of shared space where people can access information, people struggle to organize, all right? There needs to be a rhythm of meeting to core teams. You can't just be like, okay, yeah, we're a core team, we'll meet like whenever. Like rhythm, there needs to be some basic rhythm. Probably minimum monthly, for like half a day. Yeah? Some cases it's weekly, whatever. And then I think one of the other things that I'm discovering in core teams is that there needs to be a minimum, like a lot of what happens in core teams is they reconstitute over time. And if you're experiencing this, like you'll go through one phase of work and then they need to reconstitute and reform themselves and then move into a next phase of work. So that seems to happen a lot. So there's something about like as you do that, if you lose more than a third of your original folks, my experience is you begin to start diluting, the lack of better word, the corporate knowledge of your core team. Like the lineage of the work begins to dissolve. Yeah? So as you go through these changes in membership, which just happens, all right, because you've got your core team who's working together, and you've got people who are supporting your core team, right? And then you've got like, you've got people who are just like participating in what you're doing, participating in events and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got people who are just like really happy it's happening, woo, cheering from the sidelines, right? People move between different parts of this. People step in, they're like, I'm on the core team, this is great. And then suddenly like I break my leg, or I get sad, or I get pregnant, or my wife gets pregnant, or me and my wife break up, or I just can't do this anymore. So I move back out into these different levels. Yeah? But like being able to track these allows people to be able to articulate their commitment clearly. We're not putting these in as awesome, cool. We're not putting these in as, I love that, 25 more minutes, you're fine.
Friendship.
Yeah. So these aren't like when you begin to map the levels of commitment within your core team, you're not mapping out like medieval castle walls that you get to hold each other accountable to. Right? We were working in Toronto with an organization that was doing awesome work around youth mental health, and they actually had this up on their wall with post-its in. You know, so people could be like, yeah, I'm on the core team, and then they could come in and they could actually move the post-its around, depending on where they were at. So the naming of people's commitment isn't about being able to hold them accountable and then bully them if they don't get it done. The naming of the commitment is so we can actually track where people are at, and then be kind and generous about how they get themselves involved. Make sense?
Okay. Composition, do you say one person from this department, one person from this organization, one person from this agency has a seat, something like that?
Yeah.
Leave it.
So I mean, if this is like, Phil talks about this, the balance between the strategic and the soft. Yeah. So for me, like when we're doing this work in Lunenburg County right now, and we're talking a lot about the quality of human we want there. You know, I need people on this core team who are able to be in trusting relationship with others. I need people on this core team who have a capacity to learn. They're not going to turn up and just spend the whole time convincing everybody that their perspective is the right way. Right? I need people on this core team who aren't going to disappear when conflict arises. Right? At least some of these are capacities that you build, but there at least needs to be some glimmer that is possible. Yeah? So there's a lot about like what's the capacities that a core team member actually needs to have to fully work here. You know? But there's also like our core team has to reflect the communities we're seeking to engage. Yeah? So I generally find myself less concerned with the strategic piece on the core team level than I am with who the humans are and do they reflect the diversity of community we're seeking to engage. And then I'm often building in structures that begin to deal with the kind of strategic questions that you're talking about. So we'll have a core team, and then we'll have like a strategic council, you know, which actually has a whole series of power brokers, decision makers within it. And a lot of those humans, they can't commit to being on a core team because they're flat out busy running their organizations. They're flying the plane while we all building it, you know? So it's like, so I'm often building diversity into the projects through different structures. But like, I think the more you manipulate core team membership, the less functional and effective it becomes. And there's ways to design and to deal with the strategic imperative of engaging different stakeholders, decision makers, funders, that doesn't undermine your core team's capacity to work together usefully and effectively. Does that answer the question? Yeah? Good question. Some dangers of core teams, some dangers of them. So that getting ahead of the game one, I talked about already, they just get ahead of the game and they leave people, the very people they're seeking to influence or support or the scenario they kind of create change in, suddenly they're all like talking about you theory and shit, and the whole community's like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know? And they all come back like changed and deep. You know? Right? And people are like, ooh, you're all changed and deep, I don't want to hang out with you anymore. And suddenly your project loses momentum. Right? When I did my first circle training with Christina Baldwin and Anne Linnea and all these amazing people, and then I was so excited about circle, and I came back to where I was living in Holland, and I came back in Holland, and we had this little workshop space in Engage, my company, and I brought like all of my closest friends and colleagues together, and like had this like massive elaborate center, and like I was like in circle, I rang the Tibetan bells, and like all my friends were like, gee, what happened to you, man? You're fucking weird now. Can we go down to the pub and have a conversation? Do we really need to do all this shit? I felt like we got on pretty well. Yeah? So it's just like, there's a danger in core teams that they get ahead of the game. Phil?
I think it's important to remember whatever we build has a shadow. Always.
Right.
And we tripped into this one time. Our leadership team, we refer to as our kitchen cabinet. And a few years ago, we've been in Circle for 11 years now, every Thursday morning. And a few years ago, we were with the whole staff, and we were in open space, and somebody called an open space on the question of what's the myth of the kitchen cabinet. I was blown away. I had completely did not realize that we built it so strong that it had also created that strong shadow.
Right. So core teams can become elitist. They can become elitist. They can become elitist containers. Oh, you get to go to the like art of hosting training because you're on the core team. Like, I mean, so many places that's happened where I thought, oh, you get to like go off to Columbus, Ohio, and like meet these people. Oh, now you've gone to Beyond the Basics, right? So it's like, wow, you must be way more advanced than we are. I feel way more advanced than you do. So there's all this shit. Right? So like core teams can become elitist places, and like the only way that you combat elitism is through relationship and engagement. Right? So that pattern of like going out and engaging and bringing information back and going out and engaging and bringing information back, like that shatters elitism, right? So that's why all of these boundaries need to be permeable. That's why all of these boundaries can't be medieval castle walls. It shatters the elitism, right? When your core team's becoming elitist, it's because it's not engaging the people it's seeking to work with effectively. People don't trust you anymore because they don't have enough of a relationship with you. Yeah? And then I think the last kind of big danger I see consistently is people taking action in isolation. So you'll come into a core team and someone's like, and they get really inspired, and they're like, great, I'm going to go do this, and then they're gone, you know, and then you never see them again, or you're so busy doing circle that you actually never hear back from their project. You know? So what happens when people act in isolation is that you perpetuate generally the very thing you're trying to change, which is people acting in silos, rather than people acting in a connected way. It's like you start perpetuating the pattern of only seeing waves, yeah, rather than breadth. Yeah. So one of the purpose of core teams is to make sure that our actions are happening in relationship to each other, right? And it's not that it is not our difference that's the danger. It's our disconnect, right? It's not our difference that's the danger. It's our disconnect. So we can be having actions coming out of a core team that are in fundamental contradiction to each other. And that's okay. We're just trying out different strategies of making change happen. Yeah, so like when we're doing this work around the Strategic Urban Partnership in Nova Scotia, and and these three really clear strategies came up at one point, and they were like, these are our theories of change. And there was all the people, there was around reviving the urban core, and there were all these people who were like, this is like, needs to be a groundswell, entrepreneurial, progressive, let's get shit done from the bottom up, And then there were the folks who were like, this is systems change, tax structure, policy, that's the most important thing. And then there were people who were like, no, this is about connecting, this is about institutional alignment. All the major institutions in this community need to be aligned, you know? And there was this point where people were feeling they had to choose, you know? And it was like, whoa, 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 if we choose, we're done. Why don't you go and explore progressive entrepreneurial awesome groundswell change? And why don't you go sort out like organizational alignment across the downtown core? And why don't you go and fix the crappy tax structure? Awesome, but let's make sure that we stay connected as we do that to each other. And that's what core teams offer the opportunity to do, right? It's not about being right. It's about staying connected, right? In fact, core teams function best when we're in disagreement. Because when we're in disagreement, we're learning. This is not about having a united vision. A united vision divides a room. Usually, a united vision usually gets rid of 2/3 of the room. Mm-hmm. And therefore, 2/3 of the people you're seeking to engage. And therefore, 2/3 of your community or 2/3 of your organization. Right? An articulation of purpose, which is at the center of a core team, yeah, is an agreement that we are going to be in this conversation together and try and figure out some solution to it. Right? We're going to agree to disagree with each other a lot over the next 18 months. But around this, around the revitalization of our downtown core, around the redesign of our public health system, whatever it might be. Right? There's a purpose that is just more important than our disagreement. It's the invisible leader. All right. There's got to be clear decision making. I'm not going to spend a long time going into decision making structures. You've got to have clear and transparent decision making processes. Yeah? Please. And then you've also got to get very clear on what the level of influence is that the core team has. So if you're pulling together a core team, what's the level of influence that they have? What's the level of decision making they have? Where does it stop and end? Right? It's like, you know, when we talked on the first day about what can you change and influence and what can you not is an essential piece of designing any work. It's the same thing for forming a core team. What can we change and what can we not? Where does the boundary stop? Where does decision making actually happen? Choose was talking about in your project with the homelessness. It's actually, you know, we're really clear the decision making lies here. You know, so I don't think there's a right and a wrong way to do it, but I think it just has to be clear and unambiguously articulated. Where decision making is, what's the level of influence that we can wield? Yeah? And that's part of your invitation. Or part of your invitation is the agreement that we're going to figure that out. Yeah? One of the things that's been exciting for me, and it sounds like you're working a lot this way, Choose, already, is that core teams, although they will lead an engagement or a change process, they begin to start becoming embedded within organizational forms. They begin to become part of infrastructure, right? And so there's often this, and I just did a blog post about this, but there's often a question about, like, how do you position communities of practice or core teams within organizations? How do you, like, what's the positioning piece, you know? And the positioning piece that I'm using a lot is that, like, core teams, yeah, make hierarchy more effective, right? Because hierarchy, by its nature, yeah, wants to get information from the top to the bottom in the quickest, most effective way possible. So we build silos so that information has very clear channels that it travels through, and then it's like, boom, straight to the point of delivery. So we build silos. But what happens at the point of delivery is suddenly someone's being asked to deliver on something that demands they have a relationship to all kinds of other people across their organization, but they don't have that because we built silos. Yeah? So and this is in communities, by the way, as much as it's in organizations, it's in, right? And so the building of core teams actually starts establishing the relationships that can make the delivery of the hierarchical mandate way more effective. All right, lots to say about that at some point. All right, so what's the kind of like activity of core teams, or like how does this turn up in the design of a process? So I'm going to draw one Venn diagram. I can't resist its hues, I'm sorry. And I'm going to be quick. So there's got to be a level of engagement. Yeah, there's got to be engagement. So a core team, it's that whole breadth thing I was talking about, there's got to be engagement. And engagement can't just be events. Events are completely insufficient as a way to engage groups of people. Right? Events are not, I mean, there's a real attachment to events in the art of hosting community, I think. So there has to be also, I think you've got to be looking at online and social media, and you've got to be looking at outreach. What is the ways that you're going to go meet people where they're at? Like the story I tell all the time is when we were down in Yarmouth and they would run youth engagement processes at the Rod Grand Hotel, and they would wonder why no kids were there. And it's like, because they're 200 yards down the road outside Tim Hortons, dude, where they are every single day. All you have to do is go ask. Walk down the road, buy them a coffee, go ask. Yeah? So you've got to go meet people where they're at. That's what enables you actually to invite them authentically to some kind of event or some kind of participatory process. You've got to have a platform to make visible what you're learning, yeah, both from within your core team but also across the project as a whole, right? That could be a physical, that could be a bulletin board in a village, it could be an awesome website, and you've got to have a strategy for messaging and communications, right? So the information we've gathered, how are we getting it out there? Yeah? How are we getting it back out into the realm of the organization or the public realm in such a way that it influences debate and conversation? Yeah? And how are we getting it onto the desks of people who are making decisions so it can have some kind of strategic impact? You've got to have a strategy, you've got to have a plan for that. You've got to be working those three things in terms of activity. All right. And so how this normally rolls out for me someone calls you up. So, for example, in this Lunenburg project, I got a call from a woman called Elspeth Weil. She calls me up. She says, there's been this huge report, the Ivany report, and we want to actually respond to that with some kind of action across our county. And like that, she's like, can you meet next Tuesday? I'm like, sure, let's do it, you know? So then I end up meeting up with 5 other people, and I realize I've got a calling team. I've got 5 people from across our community who want to get something done, but they're not quite sure how to do it, you know? And they were like, and we're looking for something creative and edgy, and so somebody recommended you. Okay. And it was great. I took that as a compliment. And so the calling team then, in my work, I'm normally looking at the next step is, I don't go straight into forming a core team. I usually do some level of foundation work, you know, and so this is the work around who holds power and influence. Like, who holds power and influence here? Who is it that, if they aren't on side or feeling involved, yeah, they're going to cut the legs off this? 6 months, 1 year, 2 weeks down the road. Yeah? So there's some level of foundation. Sometimes that's a foundation retreat where we bring them all together. Sometimes it's interviews. Sometimes it's one-on-one conversations because my calling team have the leverage to do that. But there's some building of foundation here, you know? And the question isn't always, and the design isn't always about how can you give this your 100% support, you know? It's often about like, how do you feel involved enough to want to stay in this with us, to not want to undermine this as we go forward. My buddy Sarah Thompson, she always talks about, what would it take for you to come along? What would it take for you to come along? So we're not always looking for like 100% backing here. We're looking for involvement, yeah? Because involvement builds ownership, and ownership builds loyalty.
So example in this case?
In the terms of like building leaders?
I mean, in the example of the response to the report,
Yeah, so we're designing that now. So we're basically, our calling team has pulled together a list of about 120 people across the community who we're bringing together. So we're actually doing 2 things at the same time because we just don't have a huge budget. So we're doing our foundation and forming our core team. So we've had individual conversations with all the mayors across the region. So that's going on, and then we're also inviting all of those people to a launch event where they get to be part of the making of it. you know, and people are, yeah, we're reaching out individually to town leaders and to business leaders and that kind of stuff. So we're working relationship networks. In terms of the public health system, we brought together the whole senior leadership team for a 2.5-day retreat before we went into the engagement to transform public health over 5 years. And we did very clear work with them around what's the role that you're playing in relationship to the project as it moves ahead. What is your responsibility or not to the change process? And so there's a lot there about like Chris's whole thing of protecting something and taking arrows in the back, toxic handling. You know, and there's a lot there about championing things and all that kind of stuff. And so I often work with, doing this foundation work, I also often work with those folks around helping me think through who gets invited into a core team, forming a core team. Or forming a, you know, so there's some kind of core team retreat that takes place here. And so this is and when I'm working on a specific piece of strategic work, there's a few things that are happening here at a core team retreat. So one is like some capacity building, so training, yeah? One is some training around how to do this type of work. Another piece is that we're doing the strategic design of the project together. So at this point, I'm usually bringing something and then they're refining and working on it with me, yeah? And yeah. And then there's also kind of like what are the different roles and responsibilities the core team's going to play and how is it well positioned within the work and all that kind of stuff. All right. And then that then rolls out into activity, which we were just talking about, whether that's events, whether that's engagements, whether that's interventions, whether that's interviews, whatever we're doing. Then at some point there's some kind of integration that takes place, and I think there's, and we talked about this the other day, but there's integration that takes place that's like along the way we're learning, like along the way when every month when we meet, of course we're acting and we're gathering information and we're acting and we're gathering information, but there's integration that takes place over a 6-month period or an 18-month period, like hearing the questions you were in choose. There's people who are, you know, you're now 2 years in and you're doing a major piece of integration. So around like the redesign of the library in Halifax, there's a period where we're doing the design of the outside of the building with the public. We are doing design of the interior design of the building with the public. We're doing design of the exterior spaces that surround the building with the public, you know. And then at the end, there's a point where we're like, and here's the building. And the public are like, we like it, hopefully. Yeah? So there's a point where there's full integration and making things visible. And then you're named your kind of next level of major iteration.
So what's being integrated are the core teams that are doing their stuff, the core teams come together as well?
Right. So that can work on very, very large projects. You may have multiple core teams working, but to keep it simple, so in my experience, I'm working, so if I take the example of an engagement, if I'm working with a core team, that core team is going out and they're running a series of engagements within a community, you know? So they may be going out and doing some street engagement and doing like art in the park, and there's all kinds of people coming and we're gathering information around the design of the building. We may be running some very large events where 250 people are coming. We may be doing a whole social media campaign where we're gathering information, right?
One core team.
And one core team is delivering and designing all that kind of work and delivering it. Because that creates a place where the information can come in, patterns can be discerned, and then fed back out into whatever the context or the situation is. In this case, it would be the public realm and the desks of, you know, civil, you know, government decision makers.
Bringing together all of those different engagements that you're going through.
Yeah.
Identifying
Yeah.
patterns arising.
Yeah. Yeah. Pattern discernment. Yeah.
About
Pattern
3
discernment.
minutes, friend?
3 minutes. Sorry? Yeah. Sure. Sure. And that happens here, but I'm also saying that happens, yeah. Right? So you're going like exploring, gathering information, refining it down. Exploring, gather information and refining it down. And that's also happening at a level of scale too. Like there's a broader purpose as holding your own work. You're gathering information and then refining it down.
And talking about the other pillars that we've touched on.
Depth, breadth,
is there
power,
an
friendship.
assumption that friendship is part of this process? Is it often not a part of this process? Should it be a goal? to focus on making it a part of the process? Is there a danger in that? 2 seconds or less.
On friends.
Yes, no, something.
My experience is the more complex and challenging and overwhelming the problem you're trying to overcome or the issue you're trying to tackle, or even crackle, the greater the depth of relationship you're going to need. So like when I'm doing a piece of civic engagement work, you know, like I don't necessarily need to like be heart friends with the architect, right? And like different relationships need different quality. But if we're, you know.
So in that case,
So-
you're going to be more focused on the goals to accomplish.
Yeah, so I think how I would characterize it is not more focused on the goals, but the level of relationship needed, both that we feel good about the work and the work is better, right? And we feel good about working together. So it's not, but I'll let you answer then.
No.
Some
Yeah.
of that we have some after the fireside chats, we've got a whole chance to
Yeah, we can wait to dive into this more into the friendship stuff.
chew on that stuff.
So I mean, the whole friendship thing's kind of a trigger for me, because like I said on the first day, you know, because I think people in the art hosting community throw around friendship like it's confetti.
Yeah.
You know, and it's bullshit to me.
Yeah.
Because like friendship's real. Friendship isn't something you just make over a 2.5 day art hosting retreat. You know, it's something like friendship forms when you go through shit together. You know, like friendship isn't something that you can make through doing chaotic stepping stones. You know, friendship happens when like we disagree and we like fight
And respect.
and then come back having disrespected each other and say, I'm still in this with you. All right, okay. You know? And so like the greater the greater the fragmentation that you're dealing with, you know, the greater the strength of friendship you're going to need to move through it and try and heal it. You know, so if you're talking about like trying to shift institutionalized racism in the police force, yeah, like form friendships. You know, but if you're talking about designing the library of Nova Scotia, yeah, I'm going to need to be friends with these people. We're going to need to get through some stuff. But like, it's just a different ask of the relationships of the people involved. But will the relationships reflect the outcome? Yes. No matter what the scale of challenge that you're working with. Make sense?
Yeah.
Relationships may actually be the active ingredient in the change.
Yeah.
And that's what we were really talking about yesterday.
Right. And like bluntly, like when people start becoming friends and like falling in love with each other, like I begin to start trusting the outcomes. You know what I mean? Like I begin to start trusting the outcomes. When people are getting together and like strategically designing and making like strategic alliances between this funder and that, and it all feels like super cool. Like I don't really trust the outcome of that. Because I don't trust the relationships in which it was formed. Because the relationships aren't ones of trust. Right? So it's like, what does it take to be trustworthy? Oh, it takes a capacity to be in trusting relationship. Anyway, I hope it was helpful. Good? Yeah, so I think we're going to, your fireside group that you were in on the first day, and our questions here are really about like, what are your questions now about kind of like leveraging core teams and these processes to work with breadth? All right, it's one thing to build core teams and build depth and like create those fulcrums, those what are they called in science? Petri dishes, where small groups of people are coming together and figuring shit out. right? But like, what are your questions now about leveraging core teams and using these processes to work with breadth? That's the question we've got for you. So like, break out into the fireside groups. You're going to have
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
So Caitlin's going to have Post-its out. So if you can grab Post-its and then as you leave, and then write